On the morning of December 26, 1996, America woke up to a nightmare that would never fully fade away. In a quiet, wealthy town called Boulder, Colorado, a 6-year-old girl was found dead inside her own home. This was not a crime that happened in a dark alley or a dangerous neighborhood. It happened behind closed doors in a place that was supposed to be safe. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear suspect, and no simple explanation. Instead, investigators were faced with a handwritten ransom note, long, confusing, and filled with details that raised more questions than answers.
To understand why this case shook the entire nation, we first need to understand who JonBenét Ramsey was. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990. She was the youngest child in the Ramsey family, living with her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, and her older brother, Burke. The family lived in Boulder, Colorado, an affluent, quiet town known for safety, education, and a high quality of life. This was not a place where people expected violent crime, especially crimes involving children. To many Americans, JonBenét became known through photographs. She was a child beauty pageant contestant, often seen wearing stage makeup, elegant dresses, and a bright smile. These images would later become some of the most controversial aspects of the case. Supporters of the pageants described them as harmless competitions, common in certain parts of the United States. Critics, however, argued that the pageants exposed JonBenét to unnecessary attention and potential danger. But away from the cameras, JonBenét was a normal 6-year-old child. She went to school. She played with friends. She loved her family. According to friends and teachers, she was cheerful, energetic, and deeply attached to her mother. No one who knew her believed she was living in fear or danger. Her father, John Ramsey, was a success. In the early hours of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey made a frantic phone call that would change everything. At 5:52 a.m., she dialed 911. Her voice was shaking. She claimed her daughter had been kidnapped. According to Patsy, she had just discovered a ransom note on the staircase inside their home. The note stated that JonBenét had been taken and that the family would receive further instructions. The 911 call itself would later become one of the most analyzed recordings in true crime history. Some listeners hear pure panic. Others believe they hear something else: confusion, performance, or even deception. But at that moment, police had no reason to doubt the report. Officers were immediately dispatched to the Ramsey residence. What they found inside the house would raise immediate red flags. The ransom note was unusually long, nearly 3 pages handwritten on paper that belonged to the Ramsey family. It had been written using a pen from inside the house. This alone was highly unusual. Most ransom notes are short, direct, and written quickly. This one was detailed, theatrical, and oddly specific. The note demanded exactly $118,000, a number that closely matched John Ramsey's recent work bonus. It warned the family not to contact police, and it promised that JonBenét would be harmed if instructions were not followed. Yet, despite these warnings, police were already inside the house. Friends and neighbors were invited over. People walked freely through rooms that should have been treated as a crime scene. Critical evidence was likely contaminated within hours. Even more troubling, the kidnapper never called.
Once JonBenét's body was discovered inside the home, the investigation took a dramatic and controversial turn. What should have been treated as a sealed crime scene from the very beginning had already been compromised. Friends, neighbors, and family members had moved freely through the house. Doors were opened, lights were turned on and off. Evidence was touched, moved, and potentially destroyed. Investigators would later admit that critical mistakes were made in the earliest hours, mistakes that could never be undone. As police began piecing together what little reliable evidence remained, attention quickly shifted toward the people who were closest to JonBenét, her own family. John and Patsy Ramsey, once viewed as grieving parents, soon found themselves under intense public scrutiny. Their behavior was analyzed in detail: how they spoke to police, how they appeared on television, how quickly they hired attorneys. To supporters of the family, these actions were understandable. They were wealthy, well-known, and suddenly under suspicion in a national media storm. Seeking legal protection, they argued, was the smart and rational move. Critics, however, saw things very differently. They questioned why the parents were not interviewed separately immediately. They questioned delays in formal police interviews, and they questioned inconsistencies in the family's accounts of that night. One of the most debated pieces of evidence was the ransom note itself. Handwriting experts examined Patsy Ramsey's writing extensively. Some experts concluded she could not be ruled out as the author. Others strongly disagreed. No consensus was ever reached, and no charges were filed based solely on handwriting analysis. Then there was the physical evidence.
As the official investigation stalled, two main theories emerged, each with passionate supporters and each with serious, unanswered questions. The first theory suggests that JonBenét Ramsey was killed by an intruder, someone from outside the family who entered the home during the night. Supporters of the intruder theory often point to the unidentified DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. This DNA did not match any immediate family member. To many, this remains one of the strongest arguments that someone else was involved. They also argue that Boulder was not as immune to crime as many believed. There had been previous reports of break-ins in the area. Some residents admitted to leaving doors unlocked at night. The Ramsey home itself was large and complex, with multiple entry points and a basement that could be accessed quietly. An intruder, supporters argue, could have entered and exited without being seen. The ransom note, while unusual, is also cited as evidence by some. Its theatrical language, movie references, and length suggest a mind attempting to mislead investigators. Supporters believe this could indicate a disturbed outsider trying to play a role. Yet the intruder theory is not without its problems. Critics question why no clear signs of forced entry were found. They question how an intruder could spend so much time inside the home without waking anyone. And they question why the killer would leave a ransom note when the child was never taken. The second major theory focuses on the Ramsey family themselves. This theory does not necessarily accuse a specific individual, but suggests the crime may have occurred as the result of an accident or internal conflict, followed by a cover-up. Supporters of this theory point to the ransom note once again. They argue that its length, tone, and familiarity with the family's finances suggests someone inside the home wrote it. They also question the parents' behavior in the hours and days following.
As the years have passed, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey has become more than a single unsolved crime. It has become a symbol of how fragile truth can be when an investigation is overwhelmed by pressure,
mistakes, and public opinion. This case changed the way America viewed true crime. It showed how quickly a private family tragedy can turn into a national spectacle. News coverage became relentless, speculation replaced facts, and once narratives formed, they were nearly impossible to erase. For the Ramsey family, life after December 26, 1996 was never the same. They lived under suspicion, scrutiny, and judgment for years, often without clear answers or closure. At the same time, this case forced law enforcement agencies across the country to re-examine how they handle major crimes, especially those involving children. Mistakes made in the earliest hours of the investigation are now studied as cautionary lessons, examples of how critical evidence can be lost forever if procedures are not followed strictly. Advances in forensic science have brought renewed attention to the case. DNA technology continues to improve. Cold cases once thought impossible to solve have been reopened and resolved. And yet, despite all the
Even after everything we've explored in this case, many critical questions remain unanswered. Questions that investigators could never fully resolve. Questions that continue to divide experts, journalists, and the public. Was the unidentified DNA truly evidence of an intruder? Or was it contamination that led the investigation in the wrong direction? Why was the ransom note so long, so detailed, and written inside the home? And why was the amount so specific? How could a crime of this magnitude occur without a single clear timeline of events? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, how much did early investigative mistakes cost this case? These are not easy questions, and there are no simple answers. What makes the JonBenét Ramsey case so enduring is that it forces us to confront uncertainty. It challenges our assumptions about family,